Okay, good afternoon for those in the room and those viewing from abroad on the stream. I'm John Defterios. I'm a World Economic Forum Energy Fellow in the Energy and Infrastructure section, also Professor of Business for NYU in Abu Dhabi, where in my curriculum there's a great deal all about energy and making an energy transition in the Gulf states, who are traditionally oil producers, but see the need to make the transition as well. We have just 20 minutes due to the schedule of those on the stage here today. They're going to do 3-minute interventions as the two CEOs and the representative from the consumer section, which I think is excellent to have. Let me introduce them first. Henrik Andersen is the first to my left here, Chief Executive Officer of Vestas Wind Systems. On the other male of the session here is Francesco Starace, CEO and General Manager of Enel, the Italian utility group and power generator, and he'll address that. And in the center, Helena Leurent is the Director General of Consumers International. We thought at the forum it was extremely important to have the voice of the consumers after what we've seen in Russia and Ukraine, of course, and the disruption to the energy market that we're still seeing today, and the sure-footed moves by the European Union to make sure that there was enough gas supplies for the winter months, which has been a heck of a challenge as well. But one of the lessons we learned is about doing a better job of global mapping, not just of hydrocarbons, but also to broaden your energy base, which I think was the #1 lesson out of Russia, Ukraine. Don't be over-dependent on one country or the other, and to diversify your energy sources, which is the conversation. But the other thing that's key here is that the World Economic Forum is launching accelerators, and it has done so in different segments of the energy market itself. And I wanted to call on Kristen Panarelli, who's working in the Energy and Infrastructure Division, in particular focus in 2023 on the launch of clean power, which is often overlooked. I know this as a former journalist and one that keeps his head in this space. Kristen, do you want to spend a minute on defining the accelerators for clean power and electrification, if you can, before we start the press conference?
Sure, thank you, John. So we are launching a clean power accelerator as well as an electrification accelerator. And the electrification accelerator will be focused on the transformation of the demand side of the equation, while the clean power accelerator is looking more at how to increase clean power capacity. And these accelerators are going to do two things. First of all, to mobilize leaders in business, government, regulators, and civil society. We want to be looking at really, especially on the clean power side, how to speed up time to market, to get projects online much faster than now. So we'll be looking at planning and permitting and land types of issues. And we'll also be bringing in a bit more about how to do that build out of infrastructure in a way that is nature positive and contributing to reversing biodiversity loss. And on the electrification side, we'll be looking at how to transform the demand side to far more electric across buildings and mobility and even some industrial processes. And then, so part one, it's really about mobilizing leaders in this space. And part two, we'll be looking at the different models that are working. So business models, policy, even collaborative models. And we will be sharing those types of models that work, and we want to encourage stakeholders to replicate these models.
Thanks very much for that. You're welcome to stay on the podium if you want, Kristen. We weren't expecting to have you on the press conference, but it's important to define what the accelerators are because you're putting so much energy into it. If you'd like some more information, and I'll say this at the end of our press conference, you can go to the Clean Power and Electrification program page on the World Economic Forum website. And that's very clear if you search it. If you want to participate in social media to get into the dialogue, we're using hashtag WEF23. I've been adding the handle of a hashtag of energy transition. It's getting a lot of traction here at the forum because there's so much discussion. I thought it was very interesting, Henrik, and each one of you have 3 minutes to kind of lay out your views in this space, that Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Union, came forward, and her whole opening speech, it's the first time I've seen that in my 30 years plus at the forum, was on the energy transition and the urgency needed. It tells us a lot where we are today. Do you want to pick it up from there, Henrik, please?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. And I think here, I represent Vestas. We are the world's largest manufacturer of wind turbines. So for us, clean power is, of course, a natural given. We probably have the product, which is a luxury, because when you produce a wind turbine, it goes carbon negative for the first month. And then in reality, because that's where you use the steel and other things, but after 4 months, it is a product and a solution that displaces CO2 for its rest of its life, typically in excess of 30 years. So for me, when I sit here, the real progress here is that we have all now seen, we can see it's happening. We also overcome the hurdle of that there isn't a premium, there isn't an additional cost of doing the transition towards the clean power, which I think was really important. So for me, it's enlightening to see now that in 2022, we probably also got reminded that everything we do every quarter has a meaning, because this is a cumulative transformation, huge transformation, many things across the planet, for both companies, for countries, for individual continents. And I think there we all have to acknowledge we can't solve it alone. So I'm a keen believer in that today we have the tools. We don't need to talk about any cost associated with it. So for doing the right thing, we can contribute. As an executive in Vestas, I also see that to get to that transformation, there will be some bumps, there will be some need for showing evidence. And as an executive working with customers like Enel and Starace a little longer in the panel, I think it's important that when you reach out private to private as a sector. But this is also very much, as you referred to, how does government, public work with private sector, and how do we get to an acceleration of that? And of course, Kirsten, as you mentioned rightly, I think here is a obligation for us to show, but also ease the process and to some extent the red tape around accelerating these programs. The countries that are ahead and the private companies that are ahead have found ways which is worth copying. So with that, I will just pass it back to you.
I'm sure that we might super direct, and I hope we have time to have an interchange. We had a private session yesterday that was organized by Kristen on bringing all the stakeholders to the table, which I thought was really useful, but they were very candid about some of the challenges of permitting. How do you accelerate permitting if you need to make an energy transition accelerate as fast as possible? It can't be a 10 to 14-year process, right? How do you collaborate with governments within, say, the Nordic region, but how do you cross borders as governments and make it a collective push? Being a little bit short-sighted on China had a 50-year plan, and they delivered against a 50-year plan. If you're going to get into processing of rare earth minerals for the sake of wind turbines or solar PV or for battery storage, it shouldn't be dominated by one player as well. So it's actually looking at the entire value chain and how to accelerate the transition. I think if you can, Francesco, in your remarks here, and I thought it would be good to have a utility go next, and then we'll get the consumer with Helena afterwards, so we understand the thinking of our order here. I think the consumer market is not aware of the source of energy that goes in to the utility business, and Enel's been on the forefront of this now for 10 years, I think, under your leadership, if I have the timing right. It's not our first time together. Is it important to get more consumer buy-in at the utility level so people understand the transition that you're trying to make?
I think it is crucial at this point, because what Henrik just said is today possible because in the last 10 years, I would say 10, 15 years, what was supposed to be a dream happened to be real. So what the hypothesis was that renewable energy would become the backbone of electricity generation happened because it is competitive today. It was not 10 years, 15 years ago. So this decade that just ended in 2020, if you want to use these abstractions, is to be named the renewable energy decade. This is the decade in which renewable energy established itself as the generation of electricity point. Okay, because it's now cheaper. It's in the money, it's competitive. Now, what next is that when you look at electrification, when you look at what happens when electricity is becoming less expensive, more secure, and environmentally friendly, then you start to consider the use of electricity for applications that were not considered before. And we are today in the presence of a large transition of, for example, the whole automotive industry of the world into an electricity mode, which is not a small endeavor.
No.
It's a huge transformation, triggered by that we had to go through 10 years ago. And again, you're going to look like other stuff. You're going to see buildings and heating and all going to electrification as the progressive decarbonization of electricity around the world keeps going on. And so you have two big universes. One is the business universe, so customers, on large customers, medium-sized customers, businesses that find that electrifying their processes, electrifying their fleets, electrifying their operations, they are saving energy and they are getting better services and they're digitizing their operation easier. So that is what happens when you electrify. And then the consumers, they have a different view, and I think you're going to look at that. But what happens is that this is not something that the industry can do alone. While changing generation was possible, like you said, consumers don't know how you do this. We change because we find it convenient to change. Now, if you want to move your heating from burning gas and using a heat pump, it's your decision, not ours. So you need to be convinced that it is convenient, affordable, that it is clean, if you want, and also that it is easy. So these prerogatives, these attributes of the decision need to be made clear. And our task as a utility is to help consumers in that dimension, make it easy for them to understand the advantages and the convenience, help them to go through the hurdles of changing, because it's always a pain to change, but make it smooth and help this transient in the most efficient way possible. How to do that? There is an investment dimension. You need to put money into it. There is an innovation dimension. You need to innovate to make this easy. And there is a policy and advocacy dimension. You need to explain to regulators and policymakers that it's to the advantage of the system to switch out of fossil fuels into electricity. It's to the advantage of the system. They are supposed to improve. So these are the areas where the accelerator is going to move to create a database, and some examples have we done in other similar accelerators to provide evidence of good practices that can help in that direction and let other people pick them up and avoid reinventing the wheel every time.
I thought you're very prescient, Francesco, when you said, the 2020s were it was the decade of the transition,
Renewables,
right?
yeah.
Going back, or last 10 years, let's just put it that way. We participated at the International Renewable Energy Agency conversation, and to see the price come down in such a radical way over the last 10 to 12 years has been transformative, and now gives consumers a choice. I think that's a good spot for Helena to come in as Director General of Consumers International. I'm really pleased that the forum recognized the fact we need to have that voice here. I think the consumer had a shock. I even had my family in California saying, geez, what's this OPEC Plus all about, and why do we have a shortage of energy? So there was an awareness. How do you see this acceleration, a needed process now when it comes to power, do you think, Helena?
Thank you. Yeah, and likewise, I'm really glad to see the consumer voice incorporated. We're an NGO. We're a civil society organization in 100 countries, most of those low and middle income countries, and representing just you and me, our needs independently from the marketplace for a fair, safe, and sustainable marketplace. So I think the great thing about incorporating consumers and people and consumption into this is that we can help, right? Number one, you are not alone in having seen that shift, right? Our members across the world have seen dramatic increases in prices, Consumers are in crisis. They are skipping meals. They are adjusting their budgets. They're adjusting their energy use. And, we need to find ways in which we can help them now. We also recognize that if we don't create this shift, we are going to be paying even more later on. There will be even more volatility in prices, and we'll be paying also with our health. Now, the good thing, perhaps, is that we have seen also a dramatic increase in people's awareness of the need for sustainability. If you believe the stats are that we, like UNDP stats, in 50 countries, 64% of people now see this as a climate emergency. The second question is how we make it, as Francesco, you said, how we make it easy then for them to match their intent with their action. And those solutions are out there. We know that according to the IPCC, 40 to 70% of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions will be with demand-side interventions. So there's an opportunity there that we can build, and the solutions come around things like, let's find ways for investment and support to people as they make that switch, increasing awareness, helping them then with use. It's really across the consumer journey that you can make this happen. I think the key thing that I would probably add is making it with and for people. A lot of this is, collective engagement approaches to rural communities. So this can be something where you actually engage civil society, you engage with people so that they're part of. It's with and for people in the energy transition.
It's perfect. I think that's what's been missing so far. They don't have ownership of the transition. I was even saying this in my coverage. The language in the COP community is very detached from the consumer. It's kind of a language we don't understand. So I think the effort, and people say, what influence could the World Economic Forum have? It's just a talk shop. I think what we're learning here, it's good to have a producer of products, somebody who has to distribute energy, and to have a consumer sitting at the table to accelerate clean power and electrification. I know we don't have too much time. I wanted to open the floor to questions, and I did have a question myself if we do not. So if there's no questions from the floor, I know we have a lot of people watching us streaming. It was a question I posed yesterday in the private session, and again this morning in a roundtable I was chairing, and I'd love to have the two of you, Henrik and Francesco, in less than a minute each. What is the role of government in acceleration? Because I know we wouldn't have the solar PV take-up nor the wind take-up if you didn't have a decade-long targeted support, and then say, it's almost like a toddler, you have to kind of wean them off of it eventually, but you have to give the right support. Francesco, you want to start, and then we'll have Henrik come in?
I think there is a role for governments, which is always to be a little bit ahead, but not too ahead of what they see coming.
That's a great point.
So the role is get informed as much as you can about what innovation and what is happening on the technology front. Get aware of what the society needs are and combine. And in order to do that properly, you need to really look at what tools are available. We have a view that tools that proved to be effective are those that combine market forces with some incentivation rather than prescriptions top-down saying you do this or else. That's not working in, say, the large part of the world, okay?
But a dialogue with an Enel or a Vestas would be wise to say, look, this is where we think we are today. You don't want to create a cartel, but it's like, this is what we need.
I think it's clear that we don't need that much of an incentivation on stuff that has proven to be already the money. I think it's clear that we need to have policies that help customers take decisions and maybe overcome short-term hurdles in order to have a better and cheaper energy source going forward, and then there are lots of ways to do that. And I think policymakers really need to pay attention. It's sometimes wrong. Sometimes you hear, we don't want to have changes in policymaking. It's wrong. You need to have changes in policymaking. They need to be adaptive changes, not retroactive changes. They need to be changes that help this transition to happen in an orderly fashion rather than happen, because it will happen anyway, in a turbulent manner, leaving lots of casualties on the ground.
That's what we found out in the last year. Henrik, do you want to weigh in?
Absolutely here, because I think picking up on also Starace's point here, I think it's also important when we both look government and we look private sector, we cannot sort of rewind in time. We have to live forward. Life has to be lived forward. And right now, I think it's dangerous. We were on a trajectory where it's actually pointed to that electricity and energy was becoming for free when it was renewable. And we just had this wake-up call that it isn't sound and it's never going to be for free. So therefore, there is just a break now to say, let's look at it. Because in Europe right now, because we have too little of it, because we have underinvested in the cumulative effect of putting more capacity on, we have market rates that are actually 5-6 times higher than governments currently are trying to attract capital to. Maybe the ratio of 1 to 5 is wrong. Maybe it should be 1 to 4 for a period of time. So you have to increase your capacity increase, not trying to set a new record low, because that's not available currently. And that's a little bit the debate on, are you actually missing the current starting point and dreaming, or could we just start a year ago? Because you cannot do what you had too little of. And then I want to come back to Helena's point a little bit about this. How do we actually equip ourselves with something, Starace, you call it an evidence for a consumer, seeing is believing.
I agree with that.
And as I said, I gave I gave the example earlier. Try to Google Lucas Graham, who is an international artist. He ran the first CO2 neutral concert last year. He came to us and asked, can I actually run a concert like that? And we took old truck batteries and we charged it up with green energy from turbines. And it turned out that he could run 2 hours, including the pre-act and everything else, and including the light show. And 100,000 people came out of those concerts and saying, hang on, this actually works. And I think this is creating this anchor point for a consumer that it is possible. I have an active choice to do. That was a concert, it could be transport, it could be anything I'm going to do in my private life. And I think that's the availability that we need to start talking in practical examples, not just the most expensive transformation the world has ever done, which is the energy transformation.
Yeah, and well, it could be quite daunting because we're going from about $1 trillion of investment, and to get to net zero by 2050, we looked at the studies yesterday in our roundtables. It's over $4 trillion for the clean energy and another 1.3 trillion for low carbon solutions. Helena, a final thought from you, if you can, in about 45 seconds. Maybe there's collaboration with WEF here on educating consumers through your different networks around the world, their awareness, what's available for a heat pump, are there incentives there? These are the choices you have today, join us on the journey. Does that seem to make sense?
I love the idea of a movement rather than a transition, right?
Yeah.
Movement is far more, this is about our future lives. The thing it's not just about educating the consumer, right? Yes, everybody needs to have much more robust information. There are certain things that we need to solve, for example, digital rights as you build this system. For example, you pointed to legal changes. In some places there are no legal rights for prosumers as well as consumers. So I would say yes, if we can also look at the many other things that we have to build with consumers to make it easy. All right, there is a system out there of consumption that is just as important as the system of production. We need to put those together and find the synergies. That will turn energy providers into organizations that help us change the world, provide my energy efficiency, my energy services, rather than just my demand.
Yeah, I think if you use data as a precursor to this, the consumer was kind of left out of the equation, and lo and behold, they didn't know what they were signing on to, and I think might as well tackle this now. Privacy is key.
I have two very dedicated consumers back home. They are called my two daughters. They're 20 and 23 years old, and I keep being reminded of it. So I think there's also a little bit here. Bring it back into the living room back home.
Absolutely. No. My 17 and 20-year-old daughters support me on as technicians when I'm stranded, so I know exactly what you're saying.
Consumers will educate us,
Yes.
I think.
I think so, in terms of what they want as well, I think, for choice. first and foremost, I want to thank the forum for convening this. We had a really good private session which aired a number of different challenges, but we realized there are solutions. But the collaboration has to deepen, and we need to accelerate what we can do. I always say it's like a global moonshot, but I mean, this is the challenge of our lifetime, if you think of it. The challenge of the generation, but you have to solve it. There's not a lot of options. There's no plan B, to be honest. Thank you for convening the press conference and the support from the team. Again, for those who are viewing us virtually here and online, use the website of the World Economic Forum. You can do a simple search. It's Clean Power and Electrification on the program page, using the hashtag WEF23, and we're using tags such as the energy transition if you want to join the debate. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for very clear explanations of where we're trying to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.